Okay, hello everybody.
Hello.
This is not exactly the layout I was looking
I
for.
know it looks weird. It looks weird. It does. I
Let
gotta.
me see if I can change it.
I gotta share this out. Excuse me. Share the show out. Excuse me.
I think this was the layout I was looking for. Here.
Yeah, it's better.
I don't know what it's doing now at all.
I don't know. Okay, let me
Okay,
share it
everyone,
out.
please excuse us. There's some changes in the settings here at StreamYard, and we're trying to adapt to the new settings. I think
Mm-hmm.
we now have the settings we wanted, so it looks like all systems are go at this point. Anyway, this is Empowering Democracy, and I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And I'm joined by my good friend Dee Pierce, who's the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. And she has
Happy to be here.
graciously joined me tonight. Happy to see you, Dee.
Happy to see you too.
Thank you. And we got 3 commenters already. Steve Wolfbrand says hello, everybody. And the Earl of Lurl says hi, Steve. And Steve says hi, Earl. I guess we only have 2. But we do have a number of others who haven't commented yet. So that is very good. Our topics for tonight are Ukraine Nuance and Kabuki, also tariffs in more detailed form, the Trump disaster tariffs, also Democrats cave. The court says, federal court out in San Francisco says, rehire all those probationers you fired, you stupid. Well, the court didn't say that, but
Mm-hmm.
they did tell her to rehire. And then finally, we have uh, a little something on the topic of free speech, because as you know, Trump in his uh, was it his acceptance speech or his joint session of Congress? He said, "Aren't we wonderful? We have delivered free speech to the United States once again,
Yeah.
unlike what we had in the Biden administration." Well, of course, uh, that didn't last too long, as we shall see.
No, it didn't.
But what we'll start with tonight is some sharing. So let us share this to Facebook, Dee.
Yes. I've been sharing and sharing and sharing, and please, everybody, share, share, share. It's so important to let everybody know Joe's live.
And Dee's live too.
Yes.
So please tell everybody that we are live. And we've got a big show for them tonight, a very good show. See, we already have a decent number of people on Facebook.
Oh, that's good. I'm gonna go over to X.
Yes, I see we have an echo, but I think the echo will disappear.
Okay. Okay. Joe Firestone. Go into your X page.
There we go. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, Patricia Ann Austin is here and says, "Hey, it is so good to see you again." Well, thank you for coming, Patricia Ann. And Steve Wolfbrand says, hello, everybody, again. And we have a number of other folks here, but they haven't announced yet or made any comments. So we're going to start off with a video. It's an interview of Nima with Scott Ritter. Okay, on Nima's program. This is, I think, an extraordinary video because of the clarity of Scott's analysis of the negotiation situation. It's a multi-party negotiation situation, actually, primarily the U.S. and Russia. But then, of course, Ukraine is involved at some level. The Europeans are involved at some level. And it's important to know who's who and what's what. And in this video, Scott does a brilliant job of telling us. It's about a half-hour video. It's going to take us a long time to get through because, of course, we'll stop it in order to comment. Okay, hopefully the buffering won't be too bad, but we will do our best to get through it. Okay, in any case. So there is the video. I will put it up full screen. First thing that happens is it goes south. Wonderful.
The new agreement between the Trump administration and Ukrainians. And here is what Donald Trump said about that.
A lot of things, obviously, we'll be discussing what's happening with respect to Ukraine and Russia. At this moment, we have people talking in Russia. We have representatives over there, Steve Witkoff and others. And they're in very serious discussions. As you know, Ukraine has agreed, subject to this, what's happening today, to a complete ceasefire, and we hope Russia will do the same. Thousands of people are being killed, young people, usually, mostly young people. We're just talking about it. Thousands of young people are being killed a week, and we want to see that stop. And they're not Americans, and they're not from the Netherlands for the most part. No. They're from Russia, and they're from Ukraine, but they're people. And I think everybody feels the same way. We want.
So Trump is talking to the Secretary General, of NATO, the new Secretary General, who's from the Netherlands, and his name is Ruta. His first name is Mark, if I'm not mistaken. So Trump and he were having a conversation, and so we'll get on with that conversation now.
Wanted to stop. It's also a tremendous cost to the United States and to other countries. And it's something that would have never happened if I were president. And it makes me very angry to see that it did happen. But it happened, and we have to stop it. And
this is the easiest hack in 2025 to clean your dog's teeth.
Best way to get rid of stinky dog breath? Crunchy veggies for natural.
Mark has done.
Here is what he said, Scott. And many people are arguing what's the main reason of talking about ceasefire while they're knowing that both parties, Ukrainians and Russians, are talking about they don't want to accept a ceasefire. But it was some sort of surprise for many people that the Russian president said he responded this way.
In this situation, I think the Ukrainian side might well want to achieve at least 30 days of ceasefire. And we're in favor of that, but there are nuances, though. Number one is what we're going to do with this sector of breached state border. If we stop the hostilities for 30 days, what it's going to mean? Will that mean that everybody there is going to retreat without fighting? Are we going to have to let them go after all the atrocities they have perpetrated against civilians? or the Ukrainian leadership will command them to lower their weapons, drop their weapons, and just surrender? How is it going to look? That's still unclear. And what about other issues along the entire contact line, which is almost 2,000 kilometers? And as you know, Russian troops have been advancing almost all along the contact line. And there already conditions are favorable for us to surround and encircle whole military units. How are they going to use those 30 days? Is the ceasefire going to be used to continue forced mobilization, to continue rearming, to continue supplies of weaponry, to allow military units to regroup?
Oh, you're so happy. Where can you tell here?
Like this is done, then the
The
question:
tail's going around in circles.
how is control and verification is going to go? How are we guaranteed that nothing like that ever repeats? How is it going to be controlled? I really hope common sense tells everyone how it's going to look like, what it's going to look like. Who's going to give orders to cease the hostilities? And what will be the price of those orders? Just imagine 2,000 kilometers. Who's going to determine who broke the ceasefire along those 2,000 kilometers? And who's going to lay blame on others for breaking this agreement? Those are all issues that require very careful studying from both sides. So the very idea is great, I think it's correct, and we, of course, support it. There are, though, certain issues that we still need to look into and to discuss. And we need to hold consultations with our American partners, counterparts. Maybe we need to have a phone talk with President Trump to discuss that with him as well. But the very idea of ending this conflict in a peaceful manner, we support that.
He simply says that the idea is so nice to think of, but how can we implement that? The various issues that he has raised during his response. What's your take on the way that Russians are thinking of a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, first of all, we have to stop pretending that all this took place in a vacuum. We have to stop pretending that this narrative began in Riyadh earlier this week with a dialogue between the United States and Ukraine. That somehow what came out of that dialogue was new and innovative and earth-shattering, and that Russia is receiving this for the first time, and that for the first time Russia is going back to the United States with its response. This is absurd in the extreme. This is a narrative that began, back during the campaign when President Trump, then candidate Trump, was given horrible advice by his principal advisor on Ukraine, Keith Kellogg. Horrible advice. And that advice turned into policy formulations that were unrealistic, both in terms of timelines and expectations. Expectations about how Russia would respond and what America could do to bring to the table. Unfortunately, we saw that Keith Kellogg's pronouncements were embraced by the Secretary of Treasury designate, Scott Bessent, who has become the Secretary of Treasury, who has made ridiculous comments about pressure that can be put on Russia economically, comments that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, bought into and repeated, and still in some ways continues to articulate that this is his thinking. But a reality check came in the form of Russia just refusing to even engage. Russia wouldn't pick up the phone, wouldn't talk. And the reason why is that they rejected Keith Kellogg's formulations out of hand. This led to Steve Witkoff, who is normally the Middle East envoy, being sent to Russia on February 11th. Why? Why would Witkoff be sent there? Because Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi crown prince, who is very knowledgeable of the Russians, has worked with the Russians intensively. Russia is, after all, a member of the OPEC Plus, so they have constant discussions about not just energy security, but when you're talking energy security, you're talking regional stability. I think sometimes people forget that there is direct connectivity, that you can't have energy security. And if you're an energy producing nation like Saudi Arabia, and your economy is dependent upon the price of oil, and you make budgets based upon the price of oil, what you need is consistency and stability. And regional conflict brings the exact opposite, makes it impossible to balance a budget, makes it impossible to have anything predictable outcomes. And so Saudi Arabia is very interested in stability. And they watched Steve Witkoff come in and seize the reins of authority away from the Biden administration when it came to the Gaza conflict. Watch how Steve Witkoff behaved and with the Israelis and with others, and was deeply impressed and understood that Steve Witkoff's authority came not from his knowledge of the Middle East, he has none, but his ability to be the vector for Donald Trump, to channel Donald Trump. He was very close with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump trusted him implicitly. And so Mohammed bin Salman called Vladimir Putin and said, this is the guy that you need to talk to. This is the guy that can get it started. And the hint.
Okay, so that's a very important point that I had never heard before put in exactly that way. The importance, of Witkoff in getting the relations of Russia and the United States reoriented from the line that Donald Trump was originally taking based on Kellogg's advice and the pronouncements that were coming out from Kellogg, and to some degree Trump as well. So let's go on now.
Hint was dropped, and next thing you know, Steve Witkoff is on his way to Moscow, February 11th, to ostensibly recover a prisoner, Mark Fogel, who had been imprisoned by the Russians for a drug offense. But this wasn't just a prisoner retrieval mission. He met with Vladimir Putin. Now, let me just again, sometimes you got to explain things to people because they don't understand the significance of it. You just don't meet with the Russian president, just like you just don't meet with the American president. When you meet with heads of state of this caliber, there has to be a reason. His time is valuable. Why is he going to allocate time to Steve Witkoff to talk about Mark Fogel? Nope. It's because he wants to take advantage of Witkoff's access to Trump to receive a message and to send a message. And
that's another very, very important point. But also an important point is the release of Fogel. It was a gesture by the Russians to Trump. In other words, they were telling Trump, we are interested in talking, we are interested in peace, and as a gesture of goodwill, we are freeing this fellow Fogel, and Steve Witkoff can take him home, or whatever.
Whatever conversation they had resonated greatly, and it wasn't just a meeting between Witkoff and Putin. Putin brought in somebody else, a name that nobody, unless you've been following Russia intimately, like me, nobody knew before this happened. How many people can honestly say that they who Kirill Dmitriev was? When they heard that name, most people went to Google and said, who the hell is Kirill Dmitriev, and why is he meeting with Steve Witkoff? What's the importance? Why is the head of Russia's sovereign investment fund meeting with the emissary of Donald Trump? Because they speak the language of international business, and because Dmitriev was setting Witkoff straight on the reality of the Russian economy, the false expectations that Trump had about certain policy directions that could put pressure on Russia. You need to set the record straight. What can be achieved and what can't be achieved, and to talk about the potential of the economic benefits of a renewed economic relationship. This is
Okay, that too is another important point. Trump was getting a narrative from various people inside of the United States about the weakness of the economy, in Russia, because that's what our intelligence had been giving to Biden, and probably that's what it was giving to Trump also. At this point, on February 11th, there was no confirmation yet of Tulsi Gabbard, okay, as the DNI, so she wasn't able to aggregate information for Trump from the intelligence agencies and to ask hard questions of the intelligence people. Okay, so Trump, was basically getting false narratives about the situation in Russia. So one of the reasons for this meeting was for Dmitriev to set Steve Witkoff straight about the Russian view of their economic strength. This was a very important thing to do. It was important news for Steve Witkoff to bring back to Trump. Now, of course, it's not the kind of thing that Trump, would automatically believe, but he was getting the Russian point of view on how the economy in Russia was doing and some of the details, of the economy. And he wasn't getting the Russian point of view from the intelligence agencies here. So this was a very important thing to happen.
broader than just Ukraine. In fact, the conversation appeared to discuss almost everything but Ukraine. Witkoff went back the very next day. Trump has a 90-minute phone call with Donald Trump, with Vladimir Putin. I bring this up again because if you're acting as if what we're hearing from Putin today is the first time he's considered Donald Trump's position, you're wrong. You're fundamentally wrong. He heard Donald Trump's position back on February 12th when they had a 90-minute phone call where they exchanged ideas. This phone call didn't just happen out of the blue. It was they were both ready for it. They both knew what they wanted to say. They said it. They listened. And then it was followed up by a meeting in Riyadh between the Secretary of State and his counterpart, the Foreign Minister of Russia. It wasn't just them. Michael Waltz, National Security Advisor, met with his counterpart, Mr. Ushakov, and Kirill Dmitriev was there too, meeting with Steve Witkoff. You had three levels of connectivity there. Very detailed exchange of ideas rather than simply Ukraine. I bring this up because what we're seeing here is theater. That's it. This is theater. You know, Marco Rubio, when he met with the Ukrainian delegation in Riyadh earlier this week, wasn't making a final deal. Rubio knew he wasn't making a final deal. What Rubio was doing was beginning a process, but it was a process that was hampered by several things. One, by the Ukrainians themselves, who up until were refusing to. How can you talk about a negotiated settlement with Russia when the Constitution of Ukraine prohibits negotiation? I mean, this seems to be one of those stumbling blocks. And how do you proceed when, no matter what the President of the United States said, because let's just reiterate what Trump has said is some of the foundational understandings that have been reached between the United States and Russia. A, Russia didn't start this war. Wow, there goes the entire European narrative.
Right. So that's what Trump was learning about the Russian point of view. Russia did not start this war. Russia believes that the start of this war was actually the Maidan Revolution, which was a coup in Ukraine. And following the revolution, but the attacks, by the new regime on the population, the Russian part of the population, okay, of Ukraine. The attacks on Russian culture, the attacks on the people in Donetsk, okay, and Luhansk, okay, and Odessa. There were attacks in Odessa as well, very serious attacks, okay, in Odessa. From the Russian point of view, there was a war that went on before the Russians intervened even between 2014 and 2022. And 14,000 people were killed, okay, in that war. Now, that view had to be expressed, okay, to Trump to make sure that he understood it, that he understood where the Russians were coming from. So that 90-minute phone conversation was very, very important.
That this is a war of Russian aggression. Russia didn't start this war. Russia was right to defend its interests. These are fundamental things, guys. Previously, they've been dismissed as Kremlin talking points, but they're not. They're statements of fact, fact-based reality. 2, Ukraine.
Or at least the way the Russians see the facts, which is very important for the two sides making peace. When you're negotiating with somebody to make peace, you need to understand the point of view, okay, of the other side. Even if your own point of view is that the war started in 2022 with a Russian invasion, of Ukraine, you have to know, it's very important, okay, to know that the Russians strongly disagree with that they see the start of the war as being in 2014, with the Maidan revolution that overthrew a duly elected president of Ukraine who was trying to walk a fine line of neutrality between the Russians, okay, and the West, or at least that's the way he saw it. That's the way the Russians also saw it. So it was important for the Americans to understand this. So that first point, from the Russian point of view, we did not start this war. This war was started by the Ukrainians following the Maidan Revolution, which, by the way, was strongly supported by the United States and the American ambassador to Ukraine, specifically Victoria Nuland. Going on.
Ukraine will never be a member of NATO, ever. Just not going to happen. Boom.
Point 2. From the Russian point of view, absolutely unacceptable for Ukraine to become a part, okay, of NATO. So there are conditions being laid down by the Russians as to what they will tolerate and what they will not, okay, tolerate. Okay, now the Russians had communicated these conditions before to the Biden administration, but the Biden administration did not accept them. That's why the war went on and on and on, okay, and on. So here were the Russians now expressing their point of view to Trump to see if he would accept it.
3, there won't be European peacekeeping forces deployed to Ukraine. Isn't going to happen. Boom. And we can go on and on.
But that was a third very, very important point, because Keith Kellogg was talking about a ceasefire with European forces patrolling the ceasefire. I mean, that was nonsense. There wasn't even an attempt at any neutrality in that. There was no way the Russians were going to accept that. Completely unrealistic, especially in the context that the Russians have been winning the war. Scott himself periodically comes up with casualties for this war based on his own estimation. Colonel McGregor does the same thing. Both Scott and he agree, using methods that are somewhat different, that there have been more than 1 million Ukrainians killed in this war. Until Trump started communicating with the Russians, the only place he got that point of view from was from Jeff Sachs, some communications, from Jeff Sachs. But of course, he started receiving that point of view when the Americans began to seriously talk to the Russians. Now, before one says, well, we had to talk to the Russians before, there were no serious communications between the Americans and the Russians, even though the Russians tried in the run-up to February of 2022. Joe Biden would not take calls from Putin, would not take communications. Tony Blinken was not in communications with the Russians on any kind of a frequent basis at all. The Americans just wouldn't talk to the Russians, except at one point they told the Russians, what happens in Ukraine is no business of yours. I mean, that kind of ridiculousness was what was going on.
This is the reality that was set forth. Having articulated, perhaps the most important, the war in Ukraine is a proxy war between the United States and Russia. Ukraine is just a proxy. That's sort of like the defining thing. When you have the Secretary of State articulate this, saying, this is between us and Russia. We're the warring parties. Ukraine is a proxy. This is fundamental. So because when you say...
And that, of course, that point of view, that the two primary combatants are really the United States and Russia, or NATO, and Russia, with the United States as the primary mover inside of NATO, that is not something people were saying before. People have been saying the war is a war of Ukraine, and Russia. That wasn't strictly true because the Ukrainians were a proxy. That had to be accepted by both sides as a point of common understanding. And that's what happened as a result of these communications. Now, notice that when you look at mass media communications here in the United States, to this day, the mass media doesn't accept the idea of proxy war, that we were prime movers in this particular war. They see this war as one which started because the Russians invaded Ukraine in 2022. And when you look at MSM programs of various sorts, it's all about the Russians were to blame for invading Ukraine in 2022. It was completely illegitimate. It was a violation of international law. I'm not going to go into the international law aspects now, but there are international law justifications for the Russian invasion. I'll simply say that. Scott doesn't go into this here in this particular live stream. But of course, in many other live streams, he has gone into it very, very deeply. But the basic point here is the narrative from the Western side that we see every day from our mass media is very, very different. And on interview shows like Bill Maher and the Piers Morgan show, and very many other interview shows that are popular in the mass media, when you get guests who are coming on who are even slightly concerned with the Russian point of view, the hosts always work to get the guests to admit that the Russians committed aggression in 2022. Once that kind of point of view is out there and is central to the conversation, you can't have peace with the Russians because they just don't accept that as a premise. In order to get peace, you have to have a common understanding of who struck John.
That you now understand the role that Ukraine plays. They're not driving this ship. They're just the proxy. This ship is being driven by the United States. The United States started this war. The United States is the one who set the objectives of this war, which we know are the strategic defeat of Russia. And Ukraine is simply the proxy. Ironically, it's not just that this is a Kremlin talking point. I remember when I was put on the Mirtwor's death list and put on the Center for Countering Disinformation's hit list. One of the reasons why they said is that I was saying that the war is a proxy conflict between NATO and Ukraine. And that apparently is the death penalty. I'm supposed to be killed because I said that.
Okay, so at this point, I just want to make clear. Scott said on his programs and in various interviews that he had, his own show, he contended that the war was a proxy war. And the Ukraine government, a government that the United States was supporting, was giving extensive aid to, and has continued to give extensive aid to this day. That government put an American citizen on their death list, on their hit list. Scott Ritter. They put other American citizens on it too, but they put Scott Ritter on it as someone who they wanted their services to kill if they could get a hold of him. And our government allowed, the Biden administration allowed such a death list to exist. Didn't protest, didn't say anything about it, even though an American citizen resident in this country who had every right of free speech got put on a death list. Our State Department is supposed to defend our citizens, and it's supposed to defend our rights, even abroad. But the idea that the State Department would let a client state of ours that we were funding and keeping afloat have a death list with the names of Americans on it, that is just unacceptable to me. And that is one of the things the Biden administration was doing. Just unacceptable and ridiculous. What kind of democracy is it that lets that happen to one of its citizens because he or she is exercising their right of free speech?
I found it interesting, the timing of this, because about a week and a half later, the Ukrainian defense minister came out and said, oh, no. This is a proxy war between NATO and Russia, and we're happy to be that. Give us more weapons, and we will serve as your proxy. Guys, this has been known from day one. Only idiots and the mainstream media.
Notice the Ukrainian defense minister was not put on their death list for saying this. But Scott Ritter was, and a few other people were too.
I guess they're the same, have been articulating something different. And so now we have foundational understanding of this conflict. So what is the role of Ukraine? It's an insignificant role. And we saw the way that Donald Trump treated Zelensky in the White House. Dismissive. It was an ambush, time to demean him. And there's a reason for this. What happened in Riyadh? We know Zelensky was in Riyadh. We all saw the photographs of him meeting with Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince. But the president of Ukraine.
I want my money back for buying 3 of these. Don't buy another flashlight until you've seen what this new headlamp can do. This U.S. Army engine.
Why wasn't he heading up the Ukrainian delegation? Why was the presidential advisor heading it up? Because the United States said Zelensky's not welcome at the table. Don't bother. We don't want you there. You're not part of the solution. You are the problem. So again, we have to understand all this when we bring into, try and put context into the statement that Mark.
Now, there are many people, okay, in mainstream news who are outraged at the fact that Zelensky was not at the table. They were making much of this, how evil it was for the Trump administration to exclude Ukraine and Zelensky from the peace talks. But of course, if you recognize that this was a proxy war between the United States and Russia, then of course there would be no place for Zelensky at the highest level talks.
Marco Rubio used to initiate everything that you're premising this show on. But there's something else that happened too, because who visited the White House prior to Zelensky's humiliation? Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer. And they visited the White House. They tried to articulate Europe's vision of what's going on, which wasn't, by the way, a vision predicated on a ceasefire, but a vision predicated on continuing this conflict until Russia was defeated. Again, let's just make things very clear. Europe was dead set against the ceasefire. The European posture was, we must humble Russia. Russia must be defeated so that Russia knows it can never stand up to Europe again. That's what they said. I'm not making it up. And they met to talk about 800 billion euros worth of infusion of defense funding, getting boots on the ground. The French were talking about getting their nuclear deterrence deployed into Germany, putting air cover over Ukraine. War, 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 war. And now you're Donald Trump saying, I want to bring this war to an end. If I only negotiate with the Russians without bringing in Ukraine, then we have a problem with Europe, because the strategic objective for Donald Trump here is peace and stability in Europe, so the United States can disentangle itself from the European web and reallocate diplomatic, economic, and military resources to the Pacific to deal with the principal issue of China. Never forget that. Ukraine is a sideshow for what Trump wants to do with China, not military. We talked about this before. I don't believe that Trump's looking for a war with China. I think Trump's looking for an equitable solution to the tensions that exist between China and the United States. It's a whole different negotiating posture and step, and I don't want to bring it up here, except the point.
But of course, Scott was completely correct that Trump wants to get rid of the war in Europe and create a stable situation in Europe, so the United States can turn to its competition with China, okay, in Asia. By the way, this has not been only Trump's wish. It was the wish of the Obama administration to turn away from Europe and turn towards Asia to meet the competition with China. The Obama administration wasn't successful in disentangling, okay, from Europe. The first Trump administration was not successful, okay, in disentangling. I'm not even sure that during the first administration that Trump wanted to disentangle. Certainly, the Biden administration had it clearly in mind that they wanted to disentangle from Europe, but they could never do it because they were too fixated on the goal of defeating Russia, seriously damaging the Federation and preventing Russia from becoming a great power once again. They were fixated on that foreign policy goal before they turned to China. The Biden administration failed. The Trump administration decided to take a different approach, which was to make peace in Europe and then turn towards Asia. And Scott is perfectly right in pointing out that that's exactly the strategy that Trump is following. He even wants to take our troops out of Europe. That intention is pretty clear. We will see if he follows through on it. But okay, the likelihood, if a stable peace is made in Europe, if they're successful in doing that, the likelihood is we will see the closure of U.S. bases inside of Europe, in the various countries, okay, of Europe, and our troops will come home at this point. I believe this is a foreign policy objective of the Trump administration.
Point out that you can't do that if you're tangled up in a war in Europe. And left to their own devices, the Europeans apparently were willing to have a war with Russia. That would be problematic for the United States. So how do you resolve this? And again, I want to just once again remind your audience that prior to the meeting in Riyadh between Rubio and Yermak, the presidential advisor to the president of Ukraine, Europe was talking about humbling Russia on the battlefield, that there could be no ceasefire, that this war could only end with a Russian military defeat, and Europe was going to be the one to ensure that defeat occurred. That was the European posture. Then Marco Rubio comes out with Mike Waltz, and they talk about, we've agreed to a 30-day ceasefire. And there are certain conditions that the Ukrainians laid out, but it's a 30-day ceasefire, and the ball is in Russia's court. Those are very important words. Why? Because immediately out of every capital in Europe came a following statement, almost word for word. We love the idea of a ceasefire. Wait a minute. Didn't you just say that there can't be a ceasefire? Russia must be humbled militarily, defeated. But now Europe's saying, we love a ceasefire. It's the greatest thing. And the ball is now in Russia's court. They said it. Everybody said the same thing over and over again, which means that this was scripted. What the United States did is trap Europe. That's what happened in Riyadh. It's not about trapping the Russians. Everybody, oh, look, we outflanked the Russians. You never outflanked the Russians. How do you outflank somebody named Sergei Lavrov that's been around forever, who's been doing this forever? Vladimir Putin, who's been the leader of Russia for a quarter of a century. These Russians are better prepared. They know more. They know about themselves. They know about the world. They know about everybody. This is not their first rodeo. This is not their fifth rodeo. This is not their 1,000th rodeo. They invented the frickin' rodeo. And so they, you don't outmaneuver the Russians, but Donald Trump outmaneuvered.
So I don't even think Donald Trump was trying to outmaneuver the Russians. What he wanted to do was to place the Europeans in a corner. And I think he did that successfully.
Maneuvered Europe, because now Europe is committed to not war, but a ceasefire. Europe has said that is the best outcome. That is the outcome we want, a ceasefire. And the ball is in Russia's court. What's important about that term? It implies a process. I mean, it's a reference to a game. They didn't say, take it or leave it, Russia. No one said that. They said, the ball's in your court. So that's like a tennis thing, They just hit the ball into Russia's court. Now, that ball can either score a point in the match, or Russia will volley it back. Game on. And look at what Russia's done. Listen to what Vladimir Putin said. Ceasefire is essential. Essential. We accept a ceasefire. We accept it. They're playing the game. You see what happened there? They're
Balls
playing
back.
But then they went backhand back and said, but there are conditions. Now, here's the interesting thing about the conditions. They didn't send the ball back into the Ukrainian court because they don't give a damn about the Ukrainians. They didn't send it back into the European court because Europe, frankly speaking, took themselves out of the game the moment they said, we accept the ceasefire. They went to the American court.
Big Pharma hates this automatic massager, and chiropractors are losing clients because of it. This device called
And the Americans are receiving the Russian statement today, except this isn't the first time they heard this, Nima. It's the second time or the third time they've heard this. Nothing new is being presented to the Americans. Nothing new. And they will make sure that that point's driven home when, as Putin said, maybe there needs to be a phone call between us and Trump. When you have the president of Russia and the president of the United States speaking on such an important issue, that's bad news for Europe, and that's bad news for Ukraine, because the United States is going to agree to most, if not all, of Russia's conditions, because it's a game we started. We got Ukraine to agree to play the game, and then we got Europe to buy into the rules of the game. Now the Russians are saying reality-based, because that's the other thing that the Trump administration kept talking about, whether it's Pete Hegseth or whether it was J.D. Vance, whether it was Marco Rubio, whether it's the president himself, that we have to be dealing with the situation as it exists on the ground, the reality of it. And Russia is about to set forth the definition of what reality is. I don't think that this is going to be the last negotiation, but I think this is the most important negotiation. Everything else was a setup for this. The Ukrainians have committed to a process. Europe has bought into the process. Russia agrees to the process. We have a tennis match. And now Russia is sending the ball back, but the player isn't Ukraine. First of all, let's understand the following. Zelensky has been sidelined. The United States humiliated him in Washington, D.C., and then he was in Riyadh meeting with the Crown Prince, but he wasn't allowed to be the head of the delegation. He's the problem, not the solution. And right now, inside in Kiev, you hear talk now that he's out. He's done. And my guess is that he'll be out of there within 2 weeks. I don't.
Of course, that's a prediction which is definite, which I don't believe you've heard from anybody else. He's telling you that now it's over for Zelensky within 2 weeks. That's a pretty bold statement.
I don't know where he physically is right now. I don't know if he's on the sidelines of the G7 meeting. I don't know if he returned to Kiev, but he can't last long in Kiev. He's been discredited as a leader, humiliated as a leader. And he has once again directly contradicted the United States after a meeting where his negotiating team received information from Marco Rubio about territorial concessions, that this isn't going back to 2014 or 2022. It's dealing with the reality that exists today. And the Ukrainian delegation went, yeah, we understand that. Zelensky came out and said, no, 2014. We get everything back. We get all of Novorossiya, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Lugansk, and we get Crimea. That's the only term. He is so far removed from reality, it's not even place. So he's finished. It's the end of Zelensky. And when Zelensky goes, you're going to see a collapse of Ukraine, political will, social will. And all Russia has to do is keep the game playing until Ukraine gets into a position where they will comply with Russia's demands. And Europe will have no choice but to follow along. This is the game that's being played. It's called the.
So he's predicting the unconditional surrender, of Ukraine. Their surrender to Russia's terms. And he's predicting that's going to come fairly shortly now, because if it's 2 weeks for Zelensky, then after that, by the beginning of April or so, you will see the collapse of Ukraine starting at that point and big changes happening. That may take a month or two, or 3, but after that, it will be possible for Ukraine to come to a peace agreement with Russia, and for the United States to basically have agreed to that agreement, and for Trump to settle that part of the problem. During this process, it'll be necessary for Trump to bring the Europeans along. How that will happen, I don't know, because Trump is trying to bring them along with a situation where the Americans go home. Most probably, Trump will have to promise that it will still be the case, as far as the Europeans are concerned, that they still have, the nuclear umbrella of the United States. Probably to bring the Europeans along, Trump will have to probably make that kind of commitment. But the bases will be gone. The ground forces, are going to be gone. And the Europeans will have to develop their own conventional forces to take care of themselves. Whether NATO will fall apart at that point, I don't know. We have to wait and see.
Diplomacy. It's a master class being put on by the Russians, and I believe with the assistance of the United States. Who's not in Moscow right now from the United States? Marco Rubio. Not there. Why? Why isn't the Secretary of State, who has been involved in these negotiations, not present for the most important negotiation? Because he's always been a figurehead. There's somebody else pulling the strings, somebody else calling the shots. And Rubio isn't needed for this. In fact, he's a distraction from this because Rubio has tainted himself with, the Ukrainian brush and the European brush. So he's over there now playing with Europe. Well, what happened to the last person who was supposed to be the one leading the efforts and they got sidelined and sent to Europe? His name was Keith Kellogg. You do know that he was fired. He's no longer the special envoy. I'm not saying that Rubio is going to be fired. I'm going to say that Rubio is not going to be a major part of the Russian negotiation going forward. This is now in Donald Trump's hands. Steve Witkoff, although they said he's not going to be the principal negotiator, Steve Witkoff is the facilitator. And he's got this in Trump's hands. And I think that once Trump and Putin nail down the basics, they'll bring in a closer who will come in and close the deal. And that's going to happen in a matter of weeks. I think Zelensky's going to be gone. The Ukrainian government collapses. Now you have the conditions to where Russia can come in and participate in a post-conflict election that gets their man installed, gets a parliament, a Rada installed that's willing to make the constitutional changes that Russia views as a prerequisite for denazification, who will agree to demilitarization on the terms set forth by Russia. And Europe will have no choice but to comply with this. This is what happened in Riyadh. Europe was trapped into a position where a ceasefire is now the primary policy objective, as opposed to humbling Russia, defeating Russia, all the things they were talking about. That's not being talked about now. They're talking about, the necessity of a ceasefire. This is the game. We're moving towards a ceasefire, the conditions that need to be met to make a ceasefire possible.
Okay, so that's it. I'll stop sharing that and get rid of it. Okay, I thought that was amazing.
I thought so too. I'm glad you played that. That was very good.
Yeah, it was so clear. And he took such a broad point of view on the whole thing with respect to making clear the objectives of Trump, and his team. And he was so clear about showing the various roles that people were playing and about the various moves that Trump had made in order to create the negotiation situation he wanted, with Ukraine in a corner, Europe in a corner, and now the whole thing is up to Putin, and himself, and Witkoff basically serving as a facilitator. And why is he doing that? He wants to bring the troops home. He wants to turn towards the Pacific. Scott believes he doesn't want to have a war with China. That's not his objective in turning to the Pacific, but he wants the focus to be on relations with China and on working out various deals, both with Russia and China. And you can be sure he'll be trying to work out different kinds of business deals. And I believe those deals are going to enrich himself and his friends. I, don't have any illusions about the motivations of Trump, being purely noble in terms of this. But I'm pretty sure Trump doesn't want to have a war with Russia. I'm also pretty sure if he can avoid a war in the Middle East, he's really going to try to do that also, because he doesn't want to be mired down in the Middle East any more than he wants to be mired down in Europe. So I think that's going to be a part of his motivation also. But one other thing I was struck by in terms of that video was that right at the start, after playing the two short videos, and Nima asking his question, after that question was answered, the whole rest of the video is Scott Ritter holding forth and giving his picture of the situation with no other questions by Nima, at all. It was just a lecture from Scott. And I think it was a brilliant lecture from Scott. And I really generally agree with his analysis. The only thing that I would just say I'm hopeful about, but I'm not sure I entirely agree, is with the idea that Trump doesn't want to have a war with China, but wants to work out a long-term agreement with them too. Okay. Anyway, I thought that was very, very important. And I wanted to follow up that piece from Scott with another piece about foreign policy, which is from Pepe Escobar. That also is about the Kabuki in this particular situation. And Dee, I'd like to turn it over to you to read that one.
Okay.
Okay, I will share the screen.
Oh, you got comments here too.
Oh, so let's take the comments first. Okay, and then we'll go on to Pepe Escobar. I do have a bunch of comments here. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. So Gretchen Crawford is here.
Hello, Gretchen.
People in Maine were out protesting Trump and Musk, many Ukraine flags, no Palestine flags. They don't get it at all. They deserve this president. Their genocide and Zionism, by denying. Scott avoids all this, in my view. He avoided that in this particular video because he was responding to Nima's question. But Scott himself is very much opposed to Zionism and very much opposed to the genocide that's going on. I've seen all kinds of streams of his on that issue and answers he's given to questions from others on that issue. Gretchen says, they let Israel have assassination lists and let them kill Americans. That's normalized. Too many are living with death threats from Jewish supremacists in the U.S., and they give names of their targets to the foreign apartheid regime. Scott has joined the club. He needs to take on the political ideology that his enemies have in common with the ones who endanger many apartheid, anti-genocide Americans. Yemen is being bombed now, massacres in Gaza, Gazification of the... I'm not sure what you mean by Scott has joined the club, because Scott is certainly in favor of a Palestinian state and is currently a defender of Palestinian rights. At one time, during the 90s, he was quite close to the Israelis, but he's migrated his position over the years, and he's now fully in the Palestinian rights camp. Steve Wolfbrand says Ukraine can't explain where half the money went. They're extremely corrupt. Absolutely. Steve Wolfbrand says NATO should be disbanded. It is no longer necessary. That is quite true. Trump objectives on Ukraine are clear, as are Russia's. I think so. At least certainly as made clear by Scott. Steve Wolfbrand says, a great video from Scott. I think that too, of course. And Evelina says Trump has just ordered bombing the capital of Yemen. U.S. continues to war on the Middle East. Yeah, I know. I don't know why Trump has done that. In fact, it may stimulate a strong response from Yemen. That response could be in the form of a hypersonic missile attack on Tel Aviv. I don't know whether Trump, is envisioning that. I do know he's not going to be successful in stripping the capability of Yemen to attack Israel. That is buried very deep in the ground, and I don't think this attack by Trump on Yemen is going to have any sort of effect on the capability of Yemen to reply. I think it can only lead to a worse result, but we will see if I'm right about that. Did you say something, Dee?
No.
Okay. Steve Overton said, why would we have a war with China? They make all our shit. Even T-shirts and underwear, look at the labels. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Why would we have a war with China? I mean, we have, there's one reason in Trump's mind why we might have a war with China. That reason that Trump is hung up on trade deficits. He doesn't like it when we have a balance of trade with another country which is in their favor. He doesn't understand that when we have a trade deficit with the country, we are having a net gain of their goods and services in return for our electronic bits of information, which is our wire transfers, of US dollars to them, because we always pay in US dollars, of course. And so they're willing to take these dollars and to send us goods. It's mostly goods rather than services they're sending, but we're getting an enormous ton of goods. It's a very favorable trading relationship if you understand that real wealth is being traded for electronic bits of information. The MMT economists understand that, but it doesn't look like any other school of economics does. But it's a very important point, which we will come back to tonight in relation to some of the other articles we're going to cover. Steve Wolfbrand says, made in China is right. Okay, so let us go on now to Pepe Escobar's piece, which is an extremely interesting piece and also focuses on the Kabuki to some degree. In fact, the title is...
What?
Well, I'll let you read the title. It's your turn.
Okay. Here we go. The UN's review. Putin peels off the masks of the ceasefire Kabuki.
Yes.
Pepe Escobar, March 14th, 2025.
1,200 words. Relatively short.
Putin will never sacrifice Russia's indivisibility of security demands posed to Washington in December 2021 and met with a no response.
Yes, from the Biden administration.
Mm-hmm.
And
The cease. Mm-hmm.
now the Trump administration is responding.
Okay. The quote ceasefire announced with trademark bombast by Team Trump 2.0 should be seen as a tawdry kabuki inside a cheap Matryoshka. As they peel off the successive masks, the last one standing inside the Matryoshka is a woke transvestite tiny dancer, a Minsk 3 in drag.
Yeah, that's one of Pepe's jokes.
Now, Q2 a quote ceasefire redux. President Putin, in uniform only for the second time since the start of the SMO, dead serious, visiting the front line in Kursk. Finally, Q2 the actual peel-off operation, Putin's press conference after his meeting with Lukashenko in Moscow.
Yes, remember Lukashenko, okay, is the president, okay, of Belarus.
Ceasefire? Of course, we support it. And then, methodically, diplomatically, the Russian president pulled a Caravaggio and went all out Kursko on every geopolitical and military detail of the American gambit, a consummate awful destruction. End result? The ball is now back in Donald Trump's court. Incidentally, the leader of the revamping in progress empire of chaos, who does not, italics mine, does not have the cards. The art of diplomatic nuance. That's how diplomacy at the highest level works. Something out of reach of American bumpkins of the Rubio variety. Putin was gracious enough to thank, quote, the President of the United States, Mr. Trump, for paying so much attention to resolving the conflict. After all, the Americans also seem to be involved in, quote, achieving a noble mission, a mission to stop hostilities and the loss of human lives. Then he went for the kill. Quote, this ceasefire should lead to a long-term peace and eliminate the initial cause of this crisis. As an all-Russian key imperatives, widely known since at least June 2024, will have to be satisfied. After all, it's Russia that's winning the war in the battlefield, not the US, the already fragmented NATO, and much less Ukraine. Putin was adamant on the ceasefire. Quote, we are for it, but there are nuances once again. It's called diplomacy, starting with verification, arguably the crux of Putin's reasoning. Quote, these 30 days, how will they be used? To continue forced mobilization in Ukraine? To receive more arms supplies? To train newly mobilized units? Or will none of this happen? How will the issues of control and verification be resolved? How can we be guaranteed that nothing like this will happen? How will the control be organized? I hope that everyone understands this at the level of common sense. These are all serious issues.
And pretty commonsensical.
Yes, as no, the collective bureaucracy, mired in demented Russophobia, does not understand common sense, in quotes, which is true. Once again, Putin deferred diplomatically to the, quote, need to work with our American partners. Maybe I will speak to President Trump. So there will be another phone call soon.
As Scott
Trump
also thought.
Yeah, Trump, for his part, perennially floated on the clouds of bombast, already applied, quote, leverage on the negotiations, even before Putin detailed answer to the ceasefire kabuki. He ramped up sanctions on Russia's oil, gas, and banking, allowing the waiver on Russian oil sales to expire this week. That means in practice that the Euro vassals and other assorted, quote, allies cannot buy Russian oil anymore without evading U.S. sanctions.
So who did he ramp up the pressure on? Did he ramp up the pressure on Russia? Did he ramp up the pressure on the Euro vassals to agree
Yeah,
to a peace?
yeah, it sounds like he did it on Europe.
Yeah, because Russia doesn't care. They have alternative customers for their oil that they've
Yes.
long since developed. They're having no trouble selling their oil.
No, they don't. Even before that, elements from Kiev criminal gang were begging for more sanctions on Russia as part of a quote peace plan. Trump obviously agreed by bypassing basic diplomacy once again. Only those with an IQ of less than 0 can possibly believe that Moscow will support a ceasefire quote peace process where it is sanctioned for attempting to end a war that it is actually winning in the battlefield from Donbass to Kursk. Sanctions will have to be at the heart of the possible US-Russia negotiations. At least some of those thousands will have to go right from the start. Same for the 300 billion or so in Russian assets seized as in stolen. Most of it parked in Brussels.
Yes, indeed.
I annex, therefore I am. Putin's Caravaggio ceasefire painting reveals that he has obviously no interest in antagonizing the notoriously volcanic Trump, or to put it in peril the possibility of a US-Russian detente in the making. As for Kyiv and the Euro Chihuahuas, they remain on the menu and not on the table. Predictably, Western MSM, as a wave of toxic nutritus hitting a pristine shore, is spinning that Putin said, not yet, to the ceasefire gambit as a prelude to scotching any negotiations about it. These specimens would not understand the meaning of, quote, diplomacy, even if it was a comet piercing the skies.
Yes, they're so stupid.
As for the spin on the Brits, quote, helping the Americans and the Ukrainians to concoct the ceasefire gambit, that does not even qualify as a crappy Monty Python sketch. The Brit ruling classes, M16, their media and think tanks simply abhor any negotiations. They are at direct frontal war with Russia, and their plan A, no plan B, remains the same. Inflict a strategic defeat on Moscow, as the SVR knows inside out.
Yes, but by the way, it's MI6. Okay, as opposed to M16.
Oh, MI6. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're the equivalent of the CIA.
Yes.
Okay.
That's, oh, yes. Yeah, I know that. I don't know why I said the other. Okay. The heart of the matter is that the Black Sea, Vladimir Karasev's analysis, as explained to TASS, is spot on. Quote, the British have already entered the city of Odessa, which they view as a key location. The special services are heavily involved there. The British do not conceal their desire to establish a naval base in Odessa.
Okay, that is an impossibility. The Russians will never agree to the British having a naval base in Odessa.
I know, that's totally ridiculous.
Never agree. That's totally ridiculous.
Exactly.
That will never happen.
Mhm. Odessa is part of the extensive menu of Ukraine's resources already in thesis handed over to the Brits under the shady and completely illegal 100-year agreement signed between Starmer and the sweaty sweatshirt in Kiev.
Yes, of course. I hope everybody knows the sweaty sweatshirt is Zelensky. It's his name for Zelensky.
Mhm. According to the dodgy deal and its made in the shade footnotes, Zelensky already gave away to the Brits all sorts of control over minerals, nuclear power plants, underground gas storage facilities, key ports, including Odessa, and hydroelectric power plants.
Right. So he gave away all kinds of things that he has no control over
Correct.
and will have no control over. And as soon as he falls over the next 2 or 3 weeks, he will be gone. And with him, any stupid agreement he's made with Keir Starmer, who, by the way, is another idiot. Okay, please go on.
On the ongoing minerals rare earth saga in 404, or what will be left of it, the Brits are in vicious direct competition with the Americans. The CIA is obviously in the know. This whole thing will turn very ugly in no time. A serious discussion running across informed circles in Moscow is that Putin by all means will never sacrifice Russia's quote, indivisibility of security demands posed to Washington in December of 2021 and met with a no response. NATO, of course, will never agree to it. The final decision will have to come from POTUS. And that brings us to the ultimately pathetic role of NATO, graphically illustrated by POTUS in the Oval Office, gleefully expanding on his drive to annex both Canada and Greenland, both part of NATO, right in front of the sorry Dutch patsy, Tutti Frutti or Rudy, NATO Secretary General.
I mean, it's really hilarious to read Pepe.
Yes. That amorphous slab of stale Dutch Gouda cheese not only did not emit a peep about the annexations, he was gleaming like a baby in front of Trump. That was NATO stripped bare. His master's voice rules the way he wants it. And whatever he decides, even the quote security and territorial integrity of member states may be in peril. So go back to playing in your sandbox. Onward to the next Putin-Trump phone call.
Yes.
Yes.
Very insightful and very funny, of course, but always with his finger on where things are really happening, and always with an eye to reveal certain issues that very few other people have written about.
Mm-hmm.
The British presence, in Odessa. I haven't seen that anywhere else. I'm sure it is in other places, but it's just not normally in the various things we see. Okay, anyway, this is pretty consistent with what Scott had to say. It's not as bold in terms of the predictions, but it's highly consistent, especially in the idea that what we're looking at, most of what we're looking at is actually Kabuki,
Yes.
and that Trump and Putin are really controlling the whole thing, at this point. And what happens is going to be very much dependent on their various phone calls from here on in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a very important point and a very important conclusion, about all this. I'm really very curious about what they'll decide in relation to a European security framework, and very interested in whether they're going to be able to get the collaboration of Russia in terms of agreeing, I'm sorry, the collaboration of Europe in getting the Europeans to agree to the security framework that they work out. In other words, some things are going to have to be offered, to the Europeans.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of those things is going to be the reopening of the pipelines to Europe, so Europe can have access to Russian oil again. And Trump is going to have to give that away. He's going to have to give away the enormous profits the Americans are making, by shipping natural gas over to Europe. He's going to have to open up Europe again to Russian oil. I think that's going to be an important aspect of things. And I think Trump is going to have to give up something to Europe in terms of collective defense. It won't be still having American troops there, but I think he's going to have to make certain commitments to Europe if he wants them to cooperate in the general peace agreement that he and Putin are going to work out. I think there are going to be a lot of business deals involved in the peace agreement between the United States, and Russia. At least the framework for continuous business dealing of the United States with Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this because I think Trump is looking to make enormous profits from those kinds of deals for himself and his family and his friends. Now, I don't know where Elon Musk is going to stand in all of this. I think it's going to depend on the fate of the meddling of Elon Musk in the domestic politics of the United States. If what Musk is doing turns out to be a failure for Trump, it could be that Musk is going to get cut out of most of the deals that Trump is making over a period of time. But that's just a guess on my part. Okay, let's see if we have any more. Do we have any more comments? Steve Wolford says, let Elon audit the Pentagon, NMIC, and Fort Knox. We need complete transparency on JFK, RFK, MLK, UFOs, Epstein, everything. Tell us the truth. I don't think we'll be getting the complete truth from Trump, but we'll be getting the truth about things in which he is not implicated in any way. Evelyn says, this is off topic, but was wondering what a channel called Starship is. Apparently, Algeria has just started testing Starship Su-35 flights. I don't know what the Starship Su-35 is. The Su-35 is a designation for a Russian fighter jet that in capability is the rough equivalent of the F-35 in the United States. I don't know what the Starship aspect of this is, though. Yes. Thank you, honey. Bonnie is reminding me of 2 pills that I must take at this time. So, Steve Wolfbrand says Luna has had every door slammed in her face. Appreciate the effort, though. Steve says, at least Trump wants peace everywhere. That's refreshing. It's refreshing if we assume he wants peace in terms of the Middle East and China, I'm beginning to think that he wants peace in the Middle East. And I suspect he wants it in China also. But I just, it remains to be seen how much he wants these things and to what lengths he's willing to go to get them. At the end of the rainbow, though, peace in both areas means big deals for Trump and his friends. So he has strong motivations from a business point of view to make the peace. Evelina says, someone said Starship is a channel. Okay, is Starship a YouTube channel? I don't know. But anyway, let us get on to the next of our pieces now. We have a lot to get through for the rest of the show. I guess it's my turn. And we now move to tariffs.
Okay. Good old tariffs.
Good old tariffs. There was a piece in the American Prospect from Ryan Cooper on tariffs, and it's pretty good. The title is Mad King Trump's Tariff Disaster. The president's trade war on Canada is heating up in the dumbest conceivable manner. Ryan Cooper wrote this on March 12, 2025. Ryan Cooper is a very good writer and analyst.
Mm-hmm.
Trump has not made any specific demands for what he wants out of Canada, except that he wants to annex it. One of the factors that worsened the Great Depression of the 1930s, of course, was the international retreat from foreign trade. As the global economy collapsed, countries attempted to protect their home markets with tariffs. Led by the United States, whose Smoot-Hawley tariff, signed into law by President Hoover in 1930, touched off a massive trade war. I just want to make a remark about that. Notice the Smoot-Hawley tariff was passed by Congress and then signed into law by President Hoover. In those days, the president didn't have tariff power. The procedure was you go through the Congress to get your tariffs, and then you sign them into law. Congress has just passed a CR bill that gives even more authority to Trump to screw around with tariffs. The stupidest thing Congress could have done, they have now done. It was bad enough before that, but it's even worse since the CR was passed. This was not the principal cause of the crisis. Economists generally agree it made things worse. Instead of protecting home markets, the trade war merely choked off a source of foreign demand for American-made goods and services, shrinking output and causing even more unemployment. So, Donald Trump is doing his Hooverian predecessor one better. His on-again, off-again trade war in Mexico and Canada got real last week with the imposition of 25% tariff on most goods crossing the border. Canada retaliated in kind, and the province of Ontario, whose government owns many large hydroelectric dams, imposed a 25% tariff on electricity going to the American Northeast. Things heated up further on Tuesday when Trump announced, as usual, by way of an incoherent wall of text posted on Truth Social, that the tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum would increase to 50% in retaliation. Ontario Premier Doug Ford had previously threatened to cut off power to the U.S. entirely if Trump kept on escalating. Then, as I was writing this article, Trump reportedly reconsidered his escalation. So far, however, the Canadian national government, for entirely understandable reasons, has said it will keep its tariffs up until Trump stops with the syphilitic emperor routine. I think Ryan is suggesting that that his mental deterioration, which we have been seeing at least to some degree, is due to his suffering from syphilis. I have no idea whether that's true or not, but I'm just interpreting the text here.
Doesn't Canada have Medicare for all?
Oh, yes, they definitely do.
Does that mean he gives everybody Medicare for all here?
Oh, you mean if he annexes Canada?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think if he tries to annex Canada, the only way we could possibly get Canada to become part of the United States is if we gave them 9 states and we passed a national Medicare for all bill so they could have their Medicare for all. I still don't think they'd become a part of the United States.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, but they might if they knew they had 18 senators. And I don't know how many representatives they would have, but they've got 40 million people.
Oh.
So they'd have about the same number of representatives as California, which I think California has 52 representatives or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they'd probably get 52 representatives and 9 senators.
Wow.
But I think this is all gross speculation because I think Canada is perfectly happy being an independent state. Unlike Smoot-Hawley, the Trump tariffs, even if they don't escalate continually, might single-handedly cause a severe recession in America or even the world. It is, yet again, almost impossible to describe how deranged Trump's behavior is. Back in the 1930s, hundreds of economists did warn Hoover he was making a mistake, but the Depression was an unprecedented crisis, and the economic profession had seriously discredited itself by failing to predict the crash or come up with a consensus solution for fixing it. John Maynard Keynes's magnum opus, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, would not be published until 1936. So, today, by contrast, the United States is not in an economic crisis. On the contrary, thanks to Bidenomics, unemployment is low, investment is high, and growth is humming along at a healthy clip, or at least they all were, as economic indicators are now nosediving. Moreover, great swaths, I'm sorry, what did I do? Did I stop sharing that?
You're still up.
I'm still up, yes. Moreover, great swaths of the American economy have been built around access to the Canadian market. The U.S. gets 30% of its lumber, 11% of its steel, 28% of its aluminum, 20% of its domestic oil supply, 27% of its uranium ore from Canada, along with innumerable other items. Total trade across the border, including both Canadian imports and American exports to Canada, threatened by retaliatory tariffs, comes to well over $900 billion annually. The American auto industry in particular is centered around a vast complex of parts, suppliers, factories, and tooling and assembly facilities surrounding the Great Lakes region, plus parts of Mexico. Various bits of cars, I understand in particular pistons, can cross the border a half dozen times before they are placed into a finished vehicle. In that situation, along with the rest of the elaborate supply links between the U.S. and Canada exists because of trade deals that promise to secure policy baseline, the most recent of which was negotiated by Trump himself during his first term. He has thus far exempted the auto industry from tariffs, but threatened to add them in his most recent post. The way Trump has treated these tariffs, threatening to impose them, pausing for a month at the last second, imposing them again, now doubling them out of the blue, only to backtrack within hours, only reinforces the sense of chaos. Businessmen often complain that progressive policy changes will lead to the dread, quote, uncertainty, unquote, undermining investment. 95% of the time, this is a dishonest pretext covering a dislike of taxation and regulation as such, but it can be a problem, and Trump is creating about the worst uncertainty imaginable. At least in the 1930s, the tariffs were clearly laid out in a permanent schedule, giving businesses some clarity and ability to plan. Trump, by contrast, has not only broken his own promises for no reason, but also is constantly changing his demands, usually at the last second. Even if Trump eventually backs down and ends his tariff war entirely, he would be a fool to be inking some kind of business deal dependent in any way on trade with Canada at this time. Such an unstable and erratic person might change his mind again with no warning. Finally, Trump has not made any specific demands for what he wants out of Canada, except that he wants to annex it. This is another non-starter for Canadians, so there appears to be no way out of the standoff so long as Trump remains in office. Like construction, agriculture, and manufacturing will be hurt, as will others dependent on the spending of those sectors. It won't take much of that to touch off a recession, particularly given the brutal austerity being illegally imposed by shadow President Elon Musk. I think he ought to change his last name to Schmuck. The voters who swung to Trump in 2024 clearly wanted a return to the economy of 2019. Instead, they got a government out of a dark chapter of the Middle Ages, the senile, power-mad maniac with an irrational fixation on a very stupid idea, bent on imposing it on his kingdom, regardless of law or consequences. Well, let us hope Trump is really more flexible than that, and that as he sees the damage, he will get off the tariff kick. I will tell him this, okay, at least. If you want to favor American businesses in certain key areas because there's a national security interest, or there's an interest in building up the AI sector of the economy, or there's an interest in building up the quantum computing sector, or an interest in some other key things that are very, very important, okay, for the future, then the way to do it is you subsidize those industries. This is especially true because since our government is a monetary sovereign, it can subsidize those industries to its heart content, and it can do it on the basis of deficit spending. It doesn't even have to raise taxes to get the dollars it needs to subsidize the industries that it wants to subsidize. So, There's no reason to stay in the World Trade Organization. They don't particularly care for subsidies by governments of their own industries. That's because they are neoliberal and they believe in free trade above all. It's an ideological commitment to free trade. It's not a sensible commitment to free trade. Obviously, free trade has its limits in national security. It has its limits in relation to countries being able to support industries that they need to have inside of their domestic economy, okay, and not outside. A flexible approach to trade is therefore necessary. Free trade may be, I should say it's beneficial to both sides in many, many cases, but it's not always beneficial, and it should not be committed to in any kind of ideological manner. So the World Trade Organization, in my view, should just be junked, and we should freely subsidize those industries that it's in our national interest to subsidize. And we should never put on tariffs because tariffs tend to either drive up inflation or crash the economy, or both. D, any comments on this piece? I think it's a pretty good piece by Ryan Cooper.
I had the mute on. Yes, it was a very good piece.
Okay, any other comments on it? Any comments you want to make about the economics of it?
Oh, I really don't even know what to say anymore.
Okay, I guess there's one more point that I should make. I made it actually before. These people, okay, these neoliberals, are ideologically committed to free trade and desire a balance of trade that's at zero because they think that if they're running a trade deficit, that is bad for their country because they're leaking money to foreign trade. They're sending their money outside of the country. It's leaking out, okay, of the domestic economy. And this can be a cause, okay, of unemployment. Okay, and it also, I believe, serves to weaken their currency as well, okay, in international trade. However, I think the correct view of trade is generally the MMT view, which is that when you have a trade deficit, you're in the beneficial position of foreign countries sending you their goods and services in return for your currency. Now, this may be a problem if your currency creation is limited because you're not a monetary sovereign, as the various states of Europe are not. So then it may be a cause of problems. But if you're a monetary sovereign like the United States, like Canada, like New Zealand, like Japan, like China was just about a monetary sovereign at this point, like a host of other countries, a monetary sovereign. Switzerland, for example, is a monetary sovereign. Singapore is a monetary sovereign. They're all a whole bunch of countries in the world are monetary sovereigns, which means they can create as much of their currency as they want to create to pay for anything they have to pay for in their domestic economies. So if they leak money to foreign trade, through their trade deficits, they can always replace that money inside of the economy by creating new money and spending it into the economy, spending it on such things as infrastructure or the support, okay, of new industries, or on spending it on social safety nets for people, spending it on job guarantee programs. Trade deficits can always be compensated for by monetary sovereigns. And if a country is lucky enough to have a trade deficit, once again, they're getting real goods in return for electronic bits of information. Because that's what we do in international trade these days. We send our reserves over to other countries. We don't send cash over. We don't send gold over. We send electronic reserves over to other countries in payment for goods. So we're trading electronic bits of information in return for cars or refrigerators or television sets or computers, okay, or whatever. We're getting real wealth. And what they're getting in return is electronic bits of information. Now, I'm not exactly sure why they want to make that kind of trade, but it seems to me it's greatly in our favor as long as we take care to see that our vital industries are subsidized so they get to compete on an equal basis with similar industries, okay, in other nations. So there are national security considerations involved in this. There are projections concerning what kinds of industries will be important for the future, and they would govern the exceptions to free trade. But there should be those exceptions to free trade. But generally speaking, the MMT view that it's favorable when you have a trade of real wealth for electronic bits of information is correct, except for the exceptions, okay, I just mentioned. So I supplement this article on trade with the MMT view. So, do we have any comments on that?
Let's take a look.
Dawn Foster, sorry I missed the first part. Yeah, there was a lot of good stuff in the first part, Dawn. Steve Wolfman says, Doc, what about the stock market crashing? I've been watching that, on a day-to-day basis because my daughter is doing day trading now. She decided at the beginning of the year to leave her job and become a day trader on the stock market. She has been having a rough time because of what Trump has been doing. She managed to survive the last week in pretty good form, but it was tough. And it was because of the uncertainty introduced by Trump by the day. I hope next week he subsides. But what about the stock market crashing? Pretty soon, there's going to be tremendous pressure from loads of people who contributed to him because of what's happening to the stock market. I mean, I think the pressure is going to stop him at this point. And he's going to see that this is, on so many fronts, what he's doing is getting people really, really angry. He doesn't need to have his moves in international trade be those that get people really, really angry. And even the people he's supposedly doing it for, which is people in the Midwest, because he's planning on rebuilding industries here and stuff like that, they are suffering from the tariffs right now, and they're in no position to be suffering. He has to find another way to do it. I was telling him in this stream, basically, if he should ever get a hold of one of my streams, okay, is that subsidies are the way to go in this area, not tariffs. But, all right. So, Evelina says, Trump is bluffing when he talks about annexing Canada. Yeah, okay. I think he's bluffing too, but he's a very strange man. Somehow, sometimes when he says outrageous and ridiculous things, he then decides to actually try to do those things. he falls in love with his ideas, or he gets surprising reactions, which convinces him that he ought to continue. But I agree that Canada going along, welcoming the distraction, they have problems at home, just like the U.S. It's a good point, Evelina. Leadership in both countries looking for distractions. That's a good point, too. Both looking at a recession, both Canada and the U.S. There's no need for a recession here in the United States. All Trump needs to do is pass a job guarantee program, and there won't be any recession. Doc, can you do a show on quantum computing? Things are getting weird. I know things are getting weird. I've been watching some of the videos on quantum computing. I have a good basic idea on quantum computing because I was really interested in that during the end of the 1990s and the early 2000s. And I think, well, I have some thoughts on it, but I have to learn more about some of the weird things that are going on in relation to the consequences of quantum computing. I do have a feeling, though, that the people who are, being alarmist about quantum computing, that they don't, okay, even though they may understand the quantum computing hardware, and they may have a very good understanding of the computational advantages they're gaining with quantum computing, I'm not sure that they understand the paradigm shift from the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum theory to the many worlds interpretation, of quantum theory. It's important to understand the foundation of the paradigm change, because otherwise you can make mistakes in how you think about the effects of quantum computing. Now, I am not ready to do a show on quantum computing yet, but I have some suspicions that things aren't really getting as weird as they seem, and that people think that the happenings are weird happenings because they're not thoroughly understanding the paradigm shift. One reason why I think this is because one of the people who was instrumental in developing popularizing, I should say, the many worlds interpretation is, David Deutsch. And I haven't seen anything from David concerning his being alarmed about some of the results that are going on in the quantum computing area. If he was saying things about it, if he was getting alarmed about how things are going, then I would begin to get alarmed, because he really thoroughly understands how you ought to be thinking about quantum computing as a paradigm, how you ought to be thinking about the parallel worlds. So my thoughts on it haven't really matured yet. I have suspicions. I have ideas that people are making mistakes in how they're thinking about it, but I just haven't had the time to really get into it. If I do a show on it, it will be a thorough show, and I will have a solution. I don't know if it'll be correct, but I will have a solution to the conceptual problem that I think exists among those who are being alarmist about the effects of quantum computing. Anyway, that's my answer to that. But I won't just have a show that parrots what people have been saying in these videos they've been doing about quantum computing. I want to be on top of it myself before I do a video on it. Okay, here's the next Okay, here's our next piece. It's a short piece. Okay, I'll play it. Okay, and then I think that D and I will do commentary on it.
Okay.
Okay, this short piece is Bernie Sanders' statement on the CR that was just passed. It's a very short statement. Okay, let me get it here. Oh, let me get it full screen. It's about 5.5 minutes.
Continuing resolution written by right-wing Republicans in the House with no input from anybody but themselves. This bill moves our country toward authoritarianism by usurping Congress's constitutional responsibility to determine how federal funds are spent, and creates at the same time a slush fund for Elon Musk and Donald Trump to continue their war against the working families of our country. This bill puts more and more power into the hands of the White House. At a time when 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck and millions are struggling to keep their heads above water, this bill makes massive cuts to housing, healthcare, and nutrition, jeopardizes the functioning of the Social Security Administration, and continues the Trump administration's attack against veterans and the Veterans Administration. This bill will make the rich richer and the poor poorer. In order to pass this legislation, the Republicans needed 60 votes, which meant that they had to have 7 votes from Democrats, and they got them. Actually, they got 10 votes. That is sad. That is an absolute dereliction of duty on the part of the Democratic leadership. Nobody in this Senate should have voted for this dangerous bill. In America today, as all of you know, we face an unprecedented set of crises. We are moving rapidly toward an oligarchic form of society where Elon Musk and other billionaires are running the government. We are moving rapidly toward authoritarianism, where Trump is ignoring the Constitution and the separation of powers. We are moving rapidly toward a massive Republican bill, a reconciliation bill, that will cut Medicaid and other programs desperately needed by working families in order to provide the 1% with over $1 trillion in tax breaks.
Okay, just to make a comment at this point, a short comment. The CR bill has passed. It's not that bill. Okay, the bill that's going to give the tax breaks is the reconciliation bill that they're going to pass. Okay, it's a separate bill. It's about the budget for next year. Okay, the CR bill is for the final 6 months, okay, of this year. Actually, it's more than a CR bill. It's not a clean CR bill. It makes certain changes, and these changes are correctly characterized by Bernie in this YouTube.
And in the midst of all of that, climate change, the existential threat to our planet, is completely ignored by the Republican leadership. So where do we go from here? As you've heard me say many times, the economic and political crises facing our country will not be solved here in Washington, D.C. The system is just too corrupt. As a result of Citizens United, billionaires are able to spend unlimited sums of money buying and selling politicians, and that is what they do. Further, on any given day, thousands of corporate lobbyists roam the halls of Congress doing the bidding of their corporate masters. If there has ever been a time in the modern history of our country where ordinary people at the grassroots level have got to stand up and fight back, now is that time. Now is the time to reclaim our democracy. Now is the time to demand that we have an economy that works for all of us and not just the billionaire class. Now is the time for each and every one of us, as proud Americans, to get involved in the political process in any and every way that we can. Because here is the simple truth. The vast majority of the American people, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, do not want to see us maintain a corrupt campaign finance system which allows billionaires to buy elections. The vast majority of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, do not want to see Congress give tax breaks to billionaires and cut programs that low-income and working families need. The vast majority of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, do not want to see a handful of billionaires running our government. The vast majority of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, do not want to see us lose our democracy and move toward authoritarianism. The truth is, we can stop all of that. We can create a government that works for all of us and not just the few. But as evidenced today, it ain't going to happen here in Washington. It's going to happen out in your community and in your community and in your community. We are the majority. They are the 1%. The vast majority of the people are with us. They have the billionaires. Let us go forward together. Let us create the kind of nation you and I know that we can become. Thank you very much.
Okay, comments, Dee?
It's just a matter of people waking up. Wake up, wake up. Bernie's been saying pretty much the same thing over and over and over again. You know, we outnumber them.
We outnumber them, but apropos of that, he contrasted here the 1% with the rest of us. But in a way, it's even worse now, because the 1% are not the billionaires. I don't know what percent of the 1%, okay, of the billionaires, but I'll bet there's something like 1,000th, okay, of 1%.
Right. And then he...
the real damage that is being done to us now is being done by this 1/1000th, okay, of 1%.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so I did, want to make that as a comment.
And then he also mentioned the amount of Democrats that went along.
Yes, he did, and we'll go into that in more detail in just a minute because we have an article about that. But I also want to mention here that this speech, it was very short, it was very to the point, it was very calmly delivered. It was delivered in what I would call a presidential format. Most of the speeches we see are speeches at rallies and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the kind of speech we would see from him if he had become the president of the United States.
Yes.
I thought it was very short, okay, but very effective, very, very well constructed. I do want to mention, though, that he doesn't offer any specific solutions except that we all get involved. And if we all get involved, we'll all be involved in different ways and in different things, and we won't be focused on what we need to be focused in order to stop the corruption, in order to get rid of the representatives who are corrupt. Okay, now, in past years, not in recent times, but before the last election, we were doing streams that involved the idea, okay, of dump the corruption. And those streams were targeted on the idea that we needed a movement of people who would deliberately vote against those candidates who were taking money from large contributors. And we had worked out a proposal that we should be voting against everyone who takes contributions larger than $200 from anybody. I still think that's a formula for success. That's what we can all do to get rid of the corruption. I know that we don't have the capability to start such a movement ourselves, but maybe Bernie Sanders does, and maybe what he has to do is to start picking up an idea like this to focus the efforts of people on how we can get rid of the corruption. This was a fine speech, but it didn't tell people specifically what to do about the corruption. That was missing from this particular speech. So I guess that concludes the comments that I wanted to make about this. I'm going to skip going to the comments for now because the next article, which I think that you could read, Dee, is about. The next article is from the American Prospect, and what it's about is the political machinations that led to the passage of the CR Act. And here's the article. It's by Robert Kuttner, who is, he used to be the editor of the American Prospect. He's now one of the senior writers. He does good stuff in certain areas, on certain things, and he did a good piece here.
Ex-Democratic leader Schumer. Today on tap, he has defied the will of the vast majority of Senate Democrats and played right into the hands of Trump. Time for a new leader.
And there is someone who some people know as Little Chucky Schmucky.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, leaves the Senate Democratic Caucus luncheon outside the Senate chamber in the Capitol building in Washington, March 13th, 2025. Update on the roll call invoking cloture and proceeding to a vote on the continuing resolution. Schumer was able to get 9 other Democrats to vote with the Republicans, so the motion passed 62 to 38, 2 more than the 60-vote minimum. Had he not decided to lead a crusade against the vast majority of Senate Democrats, the resolution would have easily failed. In exchange, Schumer got an agreement to allow separate votes on 4 other issues, including restoration of funding for the District of Columbia, but with no guarantee of Republican support. We await further congratulations from President Trump.
So, the first thing to comment on this was the agreement to allow separate votes on 4 other issues. Those issues, those votes were sure to lose because they were separate votes that Democrats wanted to bring to the floor. There was no chance that they could get 60 votes. In other words, Democrats could get nowhere near 60 votes. All the Republicans were going to vote against them on these issues, or all but 1 or all but 2. They knew beforehand they weren't going to pass any of these 4 things. So all these things were symbolic. So Schumer got nothing in return for his support. If he hadn't gotten the 10 Democrats, including himself, to vote with the Republicans on this, they wouldn't have been able to pass the CR. Now, then there would have been a shutdown, a government shutdown. Okay, so we'll go on and continue reading this because it will discuss the possibility of a shutdown in that issue. Please go on.
Okay. For 3 days, Senate Democrats privately debated whether to support a House-passed continuing resolution keeping the government funded through September 30th, or to block it with a filibuster, thus letting the government temporarily shut down. At midnight, it looked as if Chuck Schumer had devised a deft plan. Proposed an alternative resolution to keep the government open for 30 days and send that back to the Republican House. That way, if the House did not go along, the shutdown would be on the Republicans. On Wednesday, Schumer emerged from 2 days of meeting to declare that the caucus was unified against the Republican 6-month resolution and supporting the 30-day plan instead. But it turned out that he was simply floating the idea to keep Senate progressives happy. He was confident that the more centrist Democrats would reject the idea and vote cloture to end a filibuster and send the 6-month continuing resolution to the President Trump. In a more sinister maneuver, he would allow Republicans to end debate on their CR in exchange for a vote on the 30-day resolution, a vote that would fail, leaving Republicans able to pass their bill by majority vote. Why did Schumer sabotage his own plan? Taking him at his word, always risky, he was worried that one way or another the Democrats would take more of the blame for a shutdown. He was also worried that any shutdown would give Trump even more power to decide which government departments to keep in permanent shutdown once the government reopened, as if that's not already happening. By Thursday, Schumer was appalled to realize that his too clever by half ploy was failing. Most of the more centrist Senate Democrats were prepared to filibuster in order to force a vote on the 30-day plan. One by one, relative centrist John Hickenlooper of Colorado, Mark Kelly and Ruben Gallego of Arizona, and Mark Warner and Tim Kaine of Virginia all said that they would not vote for closure. The only ones who were strongly favored giving Trump what he wanted were Schumer's longtime toady, Kristen Gillibrand of New York, and John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. With 53 Republicans in the Senate, one of whom, Rand Paul of Kentucky, opposes the continuing resolution, it would take 8 Democrats to pass closure on a 60-vote threshold. So Schumer, smoked out, decided to defy the majority of his own caucus. Late Thursday, Schumer took the Senate floor to announce that he would be voting for cloture to advance the Republican 6-month plan. Quote, "The Republican bill is a terrible option," Schumer said. Quote, "but I believe allowing Donald Trump to take even much more power via government shutdown is far worse. It's a far worse option. The Trump administration would have full authority to deem whole agency programs and personnel non-essential, furloughing staff with no promise that they would ever be rehired. But of course, Trump would have exactly the same power and more if he can point to a continuing resolution in which Congress effectively suspends its power of the purse for 6 months. Excuse me. The final vote will be held this afternoon, and while it's expected to be very close, usually when the party leader steps out, they have the votes.
Okay, so this article was written before the final vote, but obviously based on the video from Bernie, it passed 62 to 38. And as
Yeah.
said in the update to this article also, it passed by 62 to 38. Okay, please go on.
It would be an understatement to say that the majority of his caucus is furious. Each senator went through the same agonizing calculations that Schumer did and came out the other way. Better to demonstrate a show of force, and House Democrats who did make a show of force with only one defector, Jared Golden of Maine, are even angrier.
Now, the House Democrats stuck together except for one Democrat.
Yeah.
But it was the Senate Democrats who broke in half.
Mm-hmm.
Disgusting. Okay, they didn't break in half, but still.
Yeah, I know, they broke.
They broke.
Nancy Pelosi, who still wields a lot of power behind the scenes, released an extraordinary statement that blows away Schumer's logic. Quote, Donald Trump and Elon Musk have offered the Congress a false choice between a government shutdown or a blank check that makes a devastating assault on the well-being of working families across America. This false choice that some are buying instead of fighting is unacceptable. She closed by advising to, quote, listen to the woman, the ranking Democrats on the Appropriation Committee, Representative Doza DeLaura, Democrat of Connecticut, and Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington, who devised the 30-day resolution and who have warned that the House CR will allow Trump to, quote, steal from the American people. 50 House Democrats wrote directly to Schumer, urging him to reconsider. The House Democratic leadership held a press conference in Washington, even though the House is out of session, maintaining their opposition to the Republican CR. Schumer broke two prime rules of politics for leaders. First, don't defy your own troops. More important, when you have the votes, as Schumer did, don't capitulate without getting something in return. But Schumer folded a fairly strong hand unilaterally. As a thank you, Trump rubbed it in with a post on Truth Social. Quote, really good and smart move by Senator Schumer. Took, quote, guts and courage. Schumer was a decent floor leader for Joe Biden, but for most of his career, he was known all too accurately as the, quote, senator from Wall Street. Now we can add to that Trump's favorite Democrat.
And that's it. So that tells you what happened from the political point of view. I want to add to that, okay, a couple of things. A lot of the Democrats in the Senate, okay, are up in arms about this. And at this point, there's a lot of sentiment for electing a new Democratic leader in the Senate, so that hopefully and perhaps Chuck Schumer's days as leader, okay, are over. But there are some people who want him out of the Senate completely, and they are encouraging AOC to primary Schumer next year. If she does, of course, then she would step up to the Senate, where she, at least for a few years, she would be rather irrelevant as a backbencher. But people feel so strongly about it. They want him out of the Senate now altogether.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope there'll be change, because this move by him was very, very destructive, okay, at this point. I don't know why he was so afraid of the consequences. The public opinion polls were showing that right now the public is blaming Trump and Musk for everything that happens. It would be very easy to pin the government shutdown on Musk and Trump, because Mike Johnson wrote a CR bill that gave more power to Trump and Musk, and they obviously wanted that particular bill. It would have been easy for them for Democrats to pin the bill onto the Republicans and pin the blame for the shutdown onto the Republicans as well, I think. So I think Schumer made a grave mistake. He did it in a very underhanded way. He did it against the majority of his caucus. Even with 10 Democrats, that meant that there were 37 Democrats opposed to this. So he was on the short end, okay, of a vote of 10 to 37. A few years ago, during the vote on the trade deals in 2000,
Mm-hmm.
was it? I'm trying to remember whether it was, I think it was in 2015, actually. Okay, there were votes on the Obama trade deals. He was trying to pass three trade deals, but in particular, the first one involved the Pacific
Mm-hmm.
trade deal. The overwhelming majority of the caucus in the House, of the Democratic caucus in the House, was for voting against the trade deal and giving Obama what he was looking for, which was actually an up or down vote, on the trade deal. So that essentially gave away some of the power of Congress, to debate a trade deal. The bill they were passing was a bill to allow the president to come up with a trade deal and then to put it up for, yes or no vote. The Republicans were all in favor of that, and Obama was in favor of that. And there were 20 Democrats in the caucus, and who crossed over and who gave the Republicans a victory, on this bill, and Obama, a victory also. Because Obama was not with all the Democrats on this; he was with the Republicans on it. What Nancy Pelosi did, she knew that as the leader, she could not go against her caucus. So even though there's much evidence that she was with the Republicans and Obama on this trade deal, what she did is she voted herself against the trade deal and with her caucus, because she was the leader of the caucus, and she didn't want to go against the caucus. Now, she played possum in terms of trying to organize the 20 Democrats who were going over to the Republican side, because she wanted the legislation to pass. But by voting herself against the legislation, she avoided the charge of betraying her caucus. This is in contrast to what Schumer did, in this instance. he wasn't smart enough to arrange that. But she was. Okay, so there it is. I mean, this was a very backhand kind of deal. Of course, it was very much opposed by Bernie Sanders, most of the caucus. This raises the question, who should be the minority leader, okay, of the Democrats in the Senate, and in line, okay, to be the majority leader if the Democrats take over the Senate again in 2027 following the election of 2026. I say that the Democrats need a strong leader to oppose Trump. And the strongest Democrat in the Senate to oppose Trump at this time is Bernie Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think that Bernie Sanders is too old and wouldn't be able to function in that sort of context, or if something happens to his health between now and then, and there is someone who agrees with Bernie Sanders on almost every subject, and he is the junior senator from Oregon, Jeff Merkley. Jeff is a very reliable supporter of everything that Bernie supported. He's not as good at speaking as Bernie. He's not as charismatic, but he's very smart, and he would be a very strong leader. And he would never betray the caucus the way that Schumer has just done. So what I'm advocating for is that Bernie Sanders should be elected as the minority leader of the Democrats, even though he's officially not a Democrat, even though he's an independent. And if for some reason they fail to go with Bernie Sanders, then I think the person that they would be best advised to go with is Jeff Merkley, because he would also be a very strong leader. And he, okay, is very progressive. If you think about all of the other senators, I don't think there really is any alternative to either Bernie or Jeff Merkley who can meet this moment of opposing Donald Trump. When you sit and think about who's in the Senate, okay, and what they could possibly do, I cannot easily come up with another strong Democratic leader. I mean, certainly people like Tim Kaine or Mark Warner. I mean, who are these people? They show no commitment to principles. They have zero charisma. They are not people who can oppose Trump strongly. The only other person I can think of who has a chance of doing that, and he is a centrist, so of course the Democratic National Committee would be happier with him. Okay, it's probably Mark Kelly, okay, of Arizona. In recent days, it has become clear that he's very much opposed to Musk and very much opposed to Trump. he made a grand gesture the other day when he sold his Tesla, because he said he couldn't stand to be associated with a fascist product. He is a strong person, okay, with strong opinions. Okay, he's a person of courage. But when it comes to social and economic stuff, he's very centrist. And we don't need a centrist right now. We need someone who can talk to the people and who can mobilize the people.
That's true.
And that's Bernie.
Yes.
And he's the one who can do it best of all the Democrats in the Senate. So I'm saying it's the end for Schumer. It's time for Bernie. So Dawn Foster says, I just love Bernie Sanders. Well, we have two more topics to cover. One is on the court decision to rehire a lot of federal employees. And that comes from a piece on Common Dreams. Dee, would you like to go through that piece, or is it my turn?
It's your turn.
Okay, then I will go through that piece. Okay, so here we are. I have it up. Judge orders Trump administration to reverse, quote, sham, unquote, mass firing of federal workers. Quote, it is a sad day when our government would fire some good employee and say it was based on performance when they know good and well that's a lie, unquote. A U.S. judge on Thursday ruled that the Trump administration must reinstate thousands of government workers fired from half a dozen federal agencies based on a lie, quote unquote, that their performance warranted termination. U.S. District Judge for the Northern District of California, William Alsup, an appointee of President Bill Clinton, granted a preliminary injunction supporting a temporary restraining order against the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, and Acting Director Charles Ezell, on the grounds that the mass firing, oh, by the way, this one is by Brett Wilkins of Common Dreams, on the grounds that the mass firing of probationary federal employees is unlawful, quote unquote, because the agency lacked the authority for the move. Alsup, who last month also found the OPM firings illegal, ordered the Trump administration to immediately reinstate all probationary employees terminated from the Departments of Agriculture, Defense, Energy, Interior, Treasury, and Veterans Affairs. Quote, the reason that OPM wanted to put this based on performance was, at least in part, in my judgment, a gimmick to avoid the reductions in force RIF Act, because the law always allows you to fire somebody for performance, unquote. Alsup said, referring to the process used by federal agencies to reduce the size of their workforce during reorganizations or budget cuts. Now, reorganizations or budget cuts, of course, are the work of the Congress. They are not the work of the executive. This is not a private corporation. This is the government. The president doesn't do reorganizations. That's what Trump's trying to do here. But according to the Constitution, he doesn't have that authority. Liz Schuler tweeted, incredible work by AF Gen National. That's the American Federation of Government Employees National. By AFS CME, Ask Me, at UNIQ CP, and everyone who fought to get legally fired federal workers reinstated. This is what happens when workers and their unions stand together and refuse to back down. A huge win for public service. Judge orders the Trump administration to reinstate most fired probationary staff. Ruling by California judge applies to thousands of employees dismissed from 6 federal agencies. Last month, Trump signed an executive order directing Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency to institute RIFs across federal agency as part of a so-called, quote, workforce optimization initiative, unquote. Quote, "This is a sad day when our government would fire some good employee and say it was based on performance when they know good and well that's a lie," unquote. Okay, by the way, it's not simply a white lie. When you fire someone for performance from the federal government, that goes on their record. In other words, if someone should ask them, why were you let go from the federal government? Now, they can lie about it, but of course there are consequences if they lie about it. If they have to tell the truth, they would have to say, I was fired based on my performance. So it has a consequence for the people who were fired, okay, in that way. And that kind of firing is different from firing due to reduction in force. If there's a reduction in force, there's no reflection on the employee involved. Alsup wrote, that should not have been done in our country. It was a sham in order to avoid statutory requirements. The judge is absolutely right. While the White House blasted Alsup's ruling as, quote, absurd and unconstitutional and lodged an appeal, advocates for government workers cheered the decision. Everett Kelly, national president of the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, said in a statement that the union, quote, is pleased with Judge Alsup's order to immediately reinstate tens of thousands of probationary federal employees who were illegally fired from their jobs by an administration hell-bent on crippling federal agencies and their work on behalf of the American public, unquote. Quote, we are grateful for these employees and the critical work they do, okay, and AFG will keep fighting until all federal employees who were unjustly and illegally fired are given their jobs back, unquote, Kelly added. Lee Saunders, president of the American Federation of State, County, and state, county, okay, and also municipal employees, AFS CME Ask Me, said, quote, public service workers are the backbone of our communities in every way. Today, we are proud to celebrate the court's decision that orders that fired federal employees must be reinstated and reinforces they cannot be fired without reason, unquote. Quote, it's a big win for all workers, especially the AFS-CME members of the United Nurses Associations of California and Council 20, who will be able to continue their essential work at the Department of Agriculture, the Veteran Affairs Department, and other agencies, Ms. Saunders added. But Violet Wolf Saina, founder and executive director of Climate Resilient Communities, the California-based nonprofit that, quote, brings people together to create local solutions for a healthy planet, unquote, also welcomed Thursday's ruling. Quote, the mass firing of public service employees is a direct assault on the environmental justice movement and will harm people living in heavily polluted communities, unquote, she said. And quote again, today's decision represents a key win for our movement because our life-saving work cannot proceed without the vital infrastructure and support of our federal employees, unquote. So that decision is a very important decision. I think there's something like 20,000 federal employees involved or 30,000 federal employees involved. The government will have to bring them back on, but of course the government has appealed. It's possible they'll win at the Supreme Court level. They should not, though. This judge is absolutely correct. They were fired in this way because the government didn't want to go through the IRF procedure in order to do a legitimate kind of RIF. There was another reason why they didn't want to do a RIF as well. And the other reason was because, okay, if they did a RIF and did not fire them for performance, then Congress people could ask questions about why they did the RIF, since they were mandated to spend money on those employees, on the programs that those employees were working in.
Unemployment insurance.
I think if they're fired for performance, they're still due unemployment insurance after a certain period. I think they might have to wait 2 weeks, but yeah, but Bonnie may be right. I'm pretty sure after a waiting period that they can get unemployment, but of course, if people cannot immediately get unemployment, they're sustaining some economic damage that they did not have to sustain if they were subject to a RIF. So that would be significant for the individuals, as well. Okay, so that's the news. It's very good news that the federal government may be forced to hire back but those individuals. I don't see anything in this, though, and I don't know whether the decision by the judge specified that the employees would be due back pay. But I hope that was somewhere in the decision, because since they should never have been fired in the first place without reason, they should certainly be due back pay. And if the government continues to oppose the rehiring and doesn't appeal, we're probably looking at months, even if the Supreme Court sustains the decision made by the judge in California, there would be months and months of back pay involved. So I hope at least that was provided for in the decision, but I don't know if it was. Any comments, Dee?
Okay, I have my mute on. Okay, there was good points brought up there, and with people being put in this position and the long-term effects, and then when you brought up about with the resume on their resume, so this is we know it's serious, but to see another level of seriousness, and hardship, You know, it's just the whole thing is so ridiculous. It's like a wimp saying you're not a good employee when you are a good employee, and it's just these lunatics doing this with no empathy and no knowledge.
Yes, and no knowledge and with no feel for the injustice that's being done just for their convenience so they don't have to go through the RIF procedure. I mean, that's all. And because they want a convenience, they blacken the names of all of these employees. That, okay, is very, very bad. Even if the Supreme Court sustains the executive branch for some reason, with the justice at the lower level having decided that the firing performance was a lie, it at least gives to the employees something they can put on their resume that a federal judge in California decided that they really were not fired for performance. Even if the Supreme Court overturns the decision on a technicality, at least there will have been a public decision that their firing for performance was a lie. And I think that's very, very important. At least they've got something out of that.
If they had really good performance for years.
Well, they're probationary employees, so they wouldn't have had really good performance for a year. They're on probation for 2 years. They might have had good performance for those 2 years. Sure. Okay, so, we're down to our last piece now. Our last issue, and that is the free speech issue.
Okay.
And that is in your court, D. I will share it for you.
Okay. Okay. Common dreams.
Right.
This felt like a kidnapping, because it was. Family of Mahmoud Khalil releases arrest video. Khalil's wife said that, quote, officers in plain clothes who refused to show us a warrant, speak with our attorney, or even tell us their names, forced my husband into an unmarked car and took him away from me. The family of Mahmoud Khalil, a legal permanent resident of the United States, now at risk of deportation because he helped lead pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University last spring, on Friday released a video of his recent arrest by U.S. Department of Homeland Security agents in New York City, which has sparked legal battles and protests. Quote, "You're watching the most terrifying moment of my life," Khalil's wife, Noor, said in a statement about the 2-minute video. This felt like a kidnapping because it was. Officers in plain clothes who refused to show us warrants, speak with our attorney, or even tell us their names, forced my husband into an unmarked car and took him away from me. Everyone should be alarmed and urgently calling for the freedom of Mahmoud and all other students under attack for their advocacy for Palestinian human rights. Quote, "They threatened to take me too, even though we were calm and fully cooperating. For the next 38 hours after this video, neither I or our lawyers knew where Mahmoud was being held. Now, he's over 1,000 miles from home, still being wrongfully detained by U.S. immigration," said Noor, whose husband is detained at a facility in Jena, Louisiana. Noor, who is 8 months pregnant, noted that Mahmoud has repeatedly warned of growing threats from Columbia University and the U.S. government unjustly targeting students who want to see an end to Israel's genocide in Gaza. Now, the Trump administration and DHS are targeting him and other students too. Quote, "Mahmoud is clearly the first of many to be illegally repressed for their speech in support of Palestinian rights," she added. Quote, "Everyone should be alarmed and urgently calling for the freedom of Mahmoud and all other students under attack for their advocacy for Palestinian human rights."
Okay, CCR is the Center for Constitutional Rights.
Yeah, and it has breaking family of Mahmoud Khalil released footage from the night of the arrest.
Would you like me to play the footage?
Well, I'm sure you could. Well, I don't think there should be a problem, should there?
Under arrest. So turn around, turn around, turn around, turn around, turn around.
Okay,
Stop resisting. Stop resisting.
Okay, he's not resisting. He's giving me his phone, okay? He's not, I understand, he's not resisting. Like,
Don't worry about it. You're gonna have to come with us. Don't worry.
you guys really don't need to be doing all of that. حبيبي كيف بدي اتصل فيك؟ Okay. Hi, Amy. Yeah, they just like handcuffed him and took him. I don't know what to do. Okay. And what should I do? I don't know. Nor. Let me ask. Can we get a name, please? Can we get your name? I understand the lawyer is asking for your name. The lawyer's asking for your name. He's saying they don't give their names.
Oh yeah, that's right. I'll be taken to immigration custody at 26 Federal Plaza.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
I'll be taken to immigration custody at 26 Federal Plaza.
She said they're taking him to 26 Federal Plaza. Can you please specify what agency is taking him, please? Excuse me. They're not talking to me. I don't know. I don't know. Excuse me. The lawyer would like to speak to somebody. Oh my God, they're literally running away from me.
Okay. So that's the video. I mean, obviously,
Who got the video?
okay, the video was taken by his wife. Khalil.
Khalil, who finished his graduate studies at Columbia in December, is an Algerian citizen of Palestinian descent. He was living in the United States with a green card until his arrest on Saturday, in response to a filing by his legal team, which includes Amy Greer from Dreidel and Lewis, the Center for Constitutional Rights, CCR, and the Creating Law Enforcement Accountability and Responsibility, CLEAR, project. A judge has temporarily blocked his deportation.
Okay, so let's make it clear. Okay, let's make this clear. He hasn't been charged with a crime. He was picked up evidently by the immigration department, okay, by ICE. Most probably on the orders of the State Department. Okay, but there was only minimal information was given to his wife that he was being taken to, what was it, 26 Federal Plaza?
Mm-hmm.
Or something like that. I guess that's in Washington, D.C. Okay, but I don't know. Maybe it's in New York. I don't know even, because he was a student in New York, I believe.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not really clear where this was. Of course, his wife would have known because it was probably local. He fortunately had representation. Okay, and okay, so they were able to get a judge to temporarily block the deportation. But people who are living here on green cards have roughly the same constitutional rights of free speech as Americans have. Now, from the point of view of Khalil, he was being arrested, and they were attempting to deport him due to his exercise of free speech, and free assembly, which the Supreme Court has ruled these rights apply to people who are here as permanent residents and have their green cards. Okay, please go on, Dee.
The ACLU and its New York arm have joined Khalil's legal team, and his attorneys filed an amended petition and complaint on Thursday. New York NYCLU Executive Director Donna Lieberman said that with the new filing, we are making it crystal clear that no president can arrest, detain, or deport anyone for disagreeing with the government. The Trump administration has selectively targeted Mr. Khalil, a student, a husband, and father-to-be, who has not been accused of a single crime, to send a message of just how far they will go to crack down on dissent.
So here, I want to emphasize that according to Donna Lieberman, the executive director of the New York division of the ACLU, Mr. Khalil has not been accused of a single crime by any authorities. Okay, now I know there are some people who are saying that the student movement that he led or that he was a leader of didn't simply engage in free speech. There are allegations that they blocked students from entering some buildings, that some of the people who were part of this movement threatened some students, that there was interference with the rights of other students. All this may be true, but what I want to emphasize here is that Mr. Khalil has not been accused of any crime by authorities. There are no legal accusations, against him. He's never been convicted of anything.
No.
So what was he arrested for? He was arrested for speaking in disagreement with the government and being effective. He was arrested basically by Marco Rubio because Marco Rubio disagreed with what he had to say, or Marco Rubio's department disagreed with what he had to say. That kind of effort to deport him for that is definitely unconstitutional. Now here I have to introduce something else. In 2024, Scott Ritter, this was during the Democratic administration, of course, had a long record of disagreeing with the State Department. And he was due to go to Russia to give a speech. He was giving a speech at the economics conference in St. Petersburg. And he was due to get on a plane. Okay, and some federal police stopped him from getting on the plane, took his passport, didn't give him clear identifications of who they were, only told him they were acting on orders of the State Department. if I recall correctly, they too did not show any identification. Now, this business of federal officers arresting people or taking their passports or stopping them from traveling without showing legal identification, this has to stop. This is a violation of the rights of Americans or permanent residents who live here. The people who do the arrests have to identify themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We have to know they are official, that what's being done is not putting them through a kidnapping. Their cars should be labeled so we know these are official acts. How are people supposed to know that they're subject to official acts? What happens if one day an armed citizen who is accosted by someone claiming to be federal, but in no way identifying themselves, gets shot by a citizen who has a weapon? And then the citizen goes to court and says he was just resisting a kidnapping. Federal officials have to identify themselves. That's very, very important. They have to be arrested in an orderly manner. There should be warrants that they show to the victims. All that, okay, is irregular. The kinds of procedures under which Khalil and Ritter's case, he was stopped. In Khalil's case, he was actually arrested and spirited off to somewhere else. The procedures for that have to be very regular and very public. There cannot be secret police in this country. That's a mark of a totalitarian regime. Now, I want to remark how in Scott's case, the seizing of his passport was followed up by an FBI visit to his house, and they seized a bunch of records. He was not accused of any crime. They had a search warrant, and they took lots of records from him, computers, and things like that. Why? He was never charged with anything. He was never indicted. He was arrested because he disagreed with the foreign policy of the United States, and he said so. And when Trump took office, Scott was celebrating because he thought that Trump would stop the persecution of free speech dissenting from the policies of the administration. That was something the Biden administration was doing. I forget whether Trump said this in his inaugural speech or whether he said it in his joint session to Congress. But he said to people he was ending the practices of the Biden administration in suppressing dissent. He was bringing free speech back to America. That's what he said. And here he is, selectively targeting Khalil because of what Khalil had to say and attempting even to deport him. So much for respect for free speech. This administration doesn't have any more respect for free speech than the Biden administration did. It's time for the American public to cease to tolerate this kind of crap any longer. Free speech, free assembly, free press are among our basic rights. We must not have the government violating these rights. going on with the article. Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry, Dee. Please go on with the article. I got a little carried.
Okay. Quote, but we at the NYCLU and ACLU won't stand for it. Under the Constitution, the Trump administration has no basis to continue this cruel weaponization of Mr. Khalil's life, Lieberman added. Quote, the court must release Mr. Khalil immediately and let him go home to his family in New York, where he belongs. Ideas are not illegal, and dissent is not grounds for deportation. Sime Size of CCR reiterated those messages as the arrest video circulated on Friday, saying that, quote, Mr. Khalil was taken by plainclothes DHS agents in front of his pregnant wife without any legal justification. Mr. Khalil must be freed because of the government cannot use these coercive tactics to unlawfully suppress his First Amendment protected speech in support of Palestinian rights. And what infuriates me throughout this whole ordeal, and for the over a year now, is the fact people are speaking up against genocide, a genocide. I mean, and here being arrested because you're speaking up for the people, the victims of genocide, and their rights and their right to self-determination and to lead a normal life. You're against the cruelty that's being inflicted on the people, and the government is against you having empathy and standing up for human rights. It really is a twisted world.
And it's a twisted America.
Yes.
And we have to get back on track.
Right. And what I was thinking today, too, was, and I've thought about it often, is when you go back to World War II and you think about Germany. Now, look at the people who just listen to the government. Just like we have now, people just listen to the government and do what the government says, and they think they're doing right. Now you had people that did not listen to the government, were hiding people in their homes, protecting them from the government, and I'm saying, like, here we have people right now that see the horror that is going on, and you're trying to stand up for the people that are being persecuted. And the government, it's like, here again, the government is going after the people that are trying to do the right thing. And there's always people that just sit back and listen to whatever the government says. They don't think that, wait, something's horrible going on here. We have to stand up. We have to, do something.
Right. Okay, now I do want to add to this only one remark of a cautionary sort.
Okay.
Okay. That is, as far as we know, this is only a case of violating the rights of free speech.
Exactly.
Khalil had. Now, when people hold green cards, and they commit a crime, it is the right of the immigration authorities to deport them. Okay. But as long as they don't commit any crimes, then there is no such right. In Khalil's case, there will be a trial held unless the government can show that there's been commission of a crime. They will have to back off and he will be freed.
Right, because it's just free speech. And free speech means free speech about any topic.
That's right. About any topic at all. So, okay, on that note, I think we've come to the end of the show.
Okay, do you have any comments? No, I don't see any more comments.
No, I don't see any more comments. We did get an increase in attendance in the last part of the show.
Oh, that's good.
We now are at 31 people according to the indicator, and that's the high point of the evening.
Okay.
I don't know why that should be so it's 12:16 a.m.
Well, I think too is the fact that people probably, say from California, or different parts where the time zone, the time zone change.
Yeah, the time zone change could bring in more people. I agree. The Earl of Earl says, "Thank you for the show." Thank you, Earl. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And good night.
Yes, good night. Well, we spent a lot of time, spoke about a lot of different important topics. It was good you got all
Yeah,
this in tonight.
yeah, it was good.
Yes.
Okay, I'll be back on Tuesday. Will you be back on Monday with Madeline D?
I have to see Madeline's schedule.
Okay.
What her schedule's like.
Okay.
Alrighty. So thank you for a good show.
Okay, and thank you for a good show too.
Okay. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
And the Earl of Laurel says good night.
Good night, Earl of Laurel, and good night, everyone.
And good night, everyone. And by the way, we're now at our high point for the night. 32 people. Okay.